We moved into a house in the country about 4 months ago. Since we'd previously lived in an apartment, that means we needed to buy a lawnmower. Instead of putting out $200+ on a lawnmower, when we have to move in a few years, we decided to hire someone to cut our grass. Initially, we went with a guy that my fiancé used to work with, but $65 every 2 weeks starts to add up, and I was looking for something cheaper. That brings me to Charles. Charles posted in my Facebook classifieds that he was looking for some lawns to cut this weekend, and he had a reputable company, so I sent him a message. Initially, Charles came off as nice. He asked for my address so he could stop by and give me an estimate. After stopping by my house, he sent me a message saying, "Damn, sweetheart, you've got a big porch." It made me feel kind of uncomfortable, but figured I was overreacting and started planning when he could come out. I told him my days off, but he assured me I didn't have to be home. I told him to come on Wednesdays. Wednesday morning, he messaged me. "Are you home?" I said no. 3 hours later, "Are you home yet?" "No, I won't be home till after 8. Charles then informed me he had a flat tire and that he could come tomorrow. Thursday, first thing in the morning, he messaged me. "Will you be home today?" I told him no. He replied a few hours later, "Hey, are you home?" "No, I told you I wouldn't be home all day. Are you still coming out?" He then told me his truck broke down. He was sending messages like, "Please don't be upset with me, sweetheart." At this point, I was getting really creeped out. I told him to just come tomorrow. Friday. It's actually my day off, but I woke up and left the house for the day. He messages me, "Hey, I'm coming. You're off today, right?" I said, "Yep, but I'm not home." "When will you be home?" "I don't know." He messaged me later saying, "Sorry babes, I was loading the equipment onto my truck and it fell and broke. Maybe I can come tomorrow." At this point, I was really creeped out and told him to never mind and that I was going to find someone else. On Saturday, I get off work around 4 or 5, check my phone and find multiple messages from him saying that he had cut my grass and I needed to come home and give him the money. I told him no, I'll Cash App it to you. He started getting really irate and saying that I needed to give him the money now. I told him I would give the money after I got home and thought the grass was cut. I was honestly really worried he would be waiting at my house, so I got a friend to drive home behind me. He wasn't there. I sent him the money and I thought that was the end of it. Fast forward 2 months later, I'm on the phone to my fiancé as I drive to class, and he tells me he has to get off the phone because there's someone walking down our driveway. I ask what he meant, and he said there was a man walking around in our driveway and front yard. After I got to class, he texted me, telling me it was just a man who would come by to promote his lawn care business. I didn't think anything about it, as it had been 2 months, but later that night, I got home and saw a business card lying on my counter with the name of the man who had been messaging me earlier. I called my fiancé Mike at work and asked him how the guy had been acting. He said Charles seemed genuinely surprised that a man had come out and asked if he lived alone. I asked Mike if the man had stopped at any other houses and he replied, "Now that I think about it, no. After he left our house, he just left." Mike said he had seemed really desperate to help around the house and offered to cut the lawn, fix our porch, and remove any trash or scrap metal we had around the house, and then asked if we had any pests such as bats in our attic or anything. That especially freaked me out, as we do have a bat problem, and I had previously posted about it on Facebook. Mike then said what was really weird is Charles was very freaked out about the dog. He heard Max barking from inside and started asking a lot of questions like, is he big? Does he stay outside or inside? Does he ever go outside or does he stay inside completely? How big is he? Is he nice? Mike chalked it up to him being scared of dogs. He gave him a brief tour of the outside of the house and then Charles got in his truck and left. I then told Mike that this was the same guy who had been messaging me earlier in the year, and Mike started to freak out. He said that Charles had asked a lot of really specific questions about who all lived here and how long they'd lived here, and where they were at the time. He said he tried to brush them off, but Charles seemed really insistent to know if Mike was the only one in the house. Before he left, Mike specifically asked him if he had cut the lawns here before or something, and maybe was thinking of the last lawn owners. But Charles told him, "No, I just happened to be out this way and thought I'd promote my business to the neighborhood." The worst part? I had taken my fiance's car to work that day, which means my car was in the driveway when Charles stopped by. He thought I was home alone. I didn't contact the police because I thought I might be overreacting. This all happened a little while ago, and I really hope that we do not ever meet again. This occurred to my brother. My house was built in 1904. It's a single-family home, wood frame setting on a concrete block foundation. I have been living here for 18 years. All of the weird things that my siblings and me have seen or heard in this house, this one event is the most vivid. About 15 years ago, my brother and his best friends had started a garage band playing mostly Spanish rock, alternative music, but in Spanish. His friends could only get together on Sunday afternoons. They would practice in the evenings, and they would usually call it quits by 8 p.m. This was the time I usually showed up and went to bed, because I worked the graveyard shift. I usually slept for a few hours before heading to work. This event happened in the late fall, so the days were getting shorter, and they had just finished a long session when the decision to head to someone else's house came about. My brother handed his car keys to his buddy so they could load up the equipment everyone had filed out of the basement. The tricky part was that they needed to walk all the way to the back of the basement, up the back stairs, through the kitchen, down the hall into the living room, and out into the front door, where there was a porch. Everyone was outside sitting in my brother's truck waiting for him. My brother was walking up the back stairs when he remembered that he had left some food in a container sitting on a speaker in the basement. He made the decision to go back for it. Now the basement is not clean. With 4 sight lines, there had been partitions made, and the boiler and the main heating unit are right smack bang in the middle. So after my brother walks back, he's about to retrieve his food container, when out of the corner of his eye he sees it. It's a shadowy figure right at his peripheral vision. This feeling of dread and uneasiness washed over my brother. We had been taught that if you are in the presence of a spirit or ghost and you feel a bad vibe, to say a quick prayer, or to cuss at it. My brother chose the latter and said, "I don't have time for this." My brother turns around, not glancing into the dark corner. He starts to walk off to the back of the basement and briskly up the stairs, closing the door and turning off the lights as he leaves, with the last light switch on the opposite side of the front door. Luckily, the door was open, and the light from the street lamp was flooding the living room with its amber light. My brother said he felt someone at his back as he walked out the house, but at no point did he turn around, as he flicked the last switch in the living room and it went dark along with the rest of the house. As he stepped out, he pulled on the door, closing it behind him, still holding his food container in one hand, and jogged down the few porch steps and walks towards the front gate. Our house resides far from the main street, essentially having a large front yard but no rear garage. As he closed the gap between himself and his friend's truck, he kind of smiled and thought things over in his head, mad at himself for spooking out when there was no reason. He climbed into the driver's side of the truck, putting his seatbelt on and getting ready to pull out of the parking spot directly in front of the house, when one of his friends asks, "Hey, wait, what about your brother? Isn't he coming with us?" "What do you mean?" "He went to work early tonight. He's already gone. Did you see his car anywhere?" They all stared at him in disbelief and asked, "So then, who was walking behind you when you were leaving the house?" This happened about 6 months ago. First off, I work graveyard shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Then my weekends are Wednesdays and Thursdays. None of my local friends know where I live yet, and on our door we have a wreath that covers the peephole and doorknob, which has since been moved. My wife was not home when this occurred. She was thankfully at work when it all went down. I got home at roughly 7 a.m., excited to begin my weekend of gaming and spending time with the wife. The usual. I'm doing my normal routine of eating some breakfast, and after cracking open the bottle of whiskey I bought, start up my game. I use a pair of decent noise-cancelling headphones when I game, so I can't hear much of anything unless I pay attention. Around 8:30 a.m. I hear a knock. I heard this though because I'm just sitting in the lobby of a game waiting for my buddy to get back. I ignore it initially and go back to scrolling on Facebook while waiting. Not 10 seconds later, I hear it again and the doorbell rings. I now get up because it might be the landlord or something. Without checking, I unlock the door and it pushes open, and I get punched in the head, and I fall to the floor. I get up fairly quickly, and I bolt to my room where I have an old Lee Enfield rifle laying against the wall. I grab it and point it to the intruder as he's unplugging things from my PC. He sees it and yells, "Oh crap!" and bolts out the still open door. I called the police and let the apartment manager know what had just happened. The aftermath. So the police show up pretty quickly and take my statement. I tell them everything that happened, and the officer tells me he's sorry that it happened, and they'll send patrol around once an hour for the next week. They ended the conversation with, "If we catch the guy, would you want to press charges for assault?" "Yes." "Okay, sounds good. Honestly, we're probably not going to find this guy, seeing as nothing was stolen, and you weren't injured too badly. So, because I wasn't taken to the hospital, that means nothing happened basically." So they said that they were going to close the case. The other officers there asked me about the rifle I used. I told him it wasn't functional and that since it was so old I didn't need it registered, more of a prop than anything. I still had to show him, and the officer pulls the bolts open and does a general inspection and confirms there isn't a firing pin in the bolt. Turns out he was a weapons enthusiast. It's not relevant. So to the home invader who gave me a black eye, let's not meet again. Around a year, maybe a year and a half ago, I was using an app called Whisper to help me make friends after getting out of high school. I was 19 at the time and had a really nice boyfriend. I had used Whisper before and actually made 2 to 3 friends during my senior year, and also found a friend of mine's boyfriend cheating using Whisper. So safe to say this app can be a handful sometimes. I put out a Whisper asking for someone to talk to, and of course I got a ton of replies but couldn't get to all of them. But I messaged some of the more interesting ones back. This guy named Jack started messaging me, and seemed really nice. He said he was 23 and lived 8 minutes from my house. If you used Whisper, you'd know that you'd be able to search by area or go into a general section and see thousands of Whispers being uploaded that you could reply to. You can also send photos instantly after 4 messages. As soon as we messaged 4 times, he sent me a selfie, and I was surprised but didn't really respond to it. Jack was telling me how he worked for a towing company in a neighboring town, how he would have to go use the interstate to go places and all that. At the time I didn't have a job as my mother was sick, and so I would use my laptop out in the kitchen at the table to watch streams and play some games in case she needs me at any point. I remember watching my friends stream, talking to my friends and generally just having a good time, until I got a text from Jack. Now I never gave him my address, never even really explained where I lived, and I did not mention the church, the interstate, nor any landmarks near me. But he texted me saying, "Hey, look out your window." I thought maybe something happened on the interstate, but then I remembered I never told him how close it was to me. But I assumed maybe he just guessed I lived nearby. I see a tow truck right outside my house with a car that broke down. My blood ran cold. He was at the truck, waving. Also very inappropriate while working, but that's besides the point. I started shaking. Due to having some bad anxiety, I ended up having an anxiety attack. How did he know where I lived? I replied by asking that exact same question, and he said, "Well, you're home, aren't you?" I didn't respond. I went back to the stream I had up and started typing to my friends, freaking out to them and causing them to panic as well. I didn't want to call the cops because my cousin is one, and so is one of my friends. As soon as anything was heard about it, I thought I'd be in deep trouble for it, so I ignored him. Then he sent me a picture of his member on the app. I was disgusted. I deleted the post and messages from Whisper and blocked him. The next day, an unknown number messaged me. I figured it was him. I ignored it, and then I got a restricted phone call and answered. Big mistake. I was out in the garage with my cat, and this voice on the other end said, "Hey, you look so sexy right now. Wanna go for ice cream down the road?" I looked out the door that was next to me, and I see him in his car driving slowly, keeping his eyes locked on me. I jumped up and ran inside after hanging up, running to my room so I could feel comforted by my blankets in bed. I was petrified. I got a job soon after that at Subway, and he would come in and start harassing me, texting me on random numbers since I would block them all, and I felt paranoid all the time, knowing he seemed to know where I was at all times. One day, my now ex-boyfriend ended up texting him, as I had given him his original number that I had just in case anything happened since I blocked it. Furiously telling him to leave me alone, stop talking to me and everything. I never got a message back after that, but I'm still paranoid he's watching me. So Jack, let's not meet. I lived in a share house with 3 other guys at the time. However, they were all at their various jobs and I worked night shift at a nearby gas station. I was in bed after a shift, fast asleep, and I started awake, not really knowing why. There was a period of about 15 to 20 seconds after I began to wake up of silence, followed by a knock at the door. At this point, having just woken up, I was still trying to get my bearings. However, I realized that I must have woken up from someone knocking at the door. Another 15 to 20 seconds pass in silence, and I start to think maybe it was just a door-to-door salesperson or charity collections or whatever, and figure they must have left. So I start to relax a little at this point. Then the entire front of the house starts to shake, and I can hear what sounds like someone hitting the front wall with a sledgehammer. At this point, I can't really process what's going on. My first thoughts Since we lived across from a train station, it must be because of the activity there, maybe a freight train grumbling past. I don't know why I thought that, but my mind said it was the most logical thing. Then the banging stops momentarily, but resumes 5 seconds later. By this point, less than 2 minutes had passed since I woke up. However, it felt like my brain had only just started working. I realized now that at the very least, something was happening in the front of the house that I didn't really like. The bangs were very loud, and the house was pretty old and warped, almost entirely made of wood. At this point, I started to panic. I could feel the shaking frame starting to give under the blows. So I did the only thing which I could think of, and started yelling and screaming unsteadily at the front of my house. From memory, I think I frantically yelled something like, "What are you doing?" Almost as suddenly as it started, the banging stopped, and I heard some footsteps running away. For some reason, it gave me the confidence I needed to look around for a weapon to grab before I went out to confront whoever it was. I remember thinking the handle felt a little weird, and when I opened the front door, by the time I got outside, they were gone, almost as if they had never been there at all. I should mention at this point I was getting about 2 hours sleep a day before my graveyard shifts, so I was a little sleep deprived and I knew I wasn't really thinking clearly. So I started to question if anything had happened at all. When I went outside, I looked for any signs of damage to verify for sure whether this really had happened or not. That's when I saw the front door and realized why the handle felt odd. The flimsy wooden door had been struck next to the handle repeatedly and had started to splinter. If they had kicked the center of the door, I'm sure their foot would have gone right through. But they were kicking next to the handle, closer to the frame where it was slightly stronger. 1 or 2 more kicks and they'd have been inside. The police came later and I filed the report, but nothing was stolen and there was nothing stolen from the unlocked garage beneath the bedrooms. They were either too stupid to check the downstairs first, or weren't looking to steal anything, which really is the more concerning part. All of this started about 7 years ago. I was going to college and renting my uncle's basement, and on weekends I would usually drive home to my mum's house, which was about 40 minutes away. The first night that something strange happened, I was at my mum's house on a Thursday night after I got off work. I got to her place around 10:15 and went to my old room and started watching Netflix with my headphones on. I didn't have it too loud because my sister, who was in high school at the time, still had her room light on and occasionally would knock and ask me a question on her homework. The night was rather uneventful, and I decided to call her tonight and text her to wish her good night. I didn't get a reply, which made sense considering it was already past midnight, and she had to get up early to go help her grandma with something. I fell asleep shortly after. It was a nice, deep sleep. Suddenly I woke up to the feeling of someone getting up out of my bed. In my tiredness, my first thought was that it was Jill needing to get up for something in the night. As I reached out to touch what I thought was her hand, to clarify Jill was my girlfriend at the time, it was at that moment that I realized this was not Jill. This was a lot taller than her, and when it turned around it was a figure dressed in all black. Every time I've seen this figure, no matter the amount of light, the only thing that would hit it would be enough light to slightly outline the clothing, which was an old-timey suit with a long overcoat. The head was the same, with only enough light to barely make out the features, aside from a very obvious smile and eyes which held a very slight greenish tint, as if pale green light was shining gently into the eyes. Now, at this point, as soon as it looked at me, an intense feeling of fear washed over me, and, no lie, I started to cry. I had seen a good deal of things and nothing compared to that feeling. I started scrambling for my phone to shine a light on it, and as soon as I got my screen lit up and shined it in the direction of the figure, it was gone. Instead of turning on a light after that, I kept tapping the screen to keep it bright until I fell back asleep. I wasn't asleep for long. I woke up again with that same intense feeling. I looked to where the figure had been the first time, and there it was again, just standing and smiling. I grabbed my phone again and shined a light at it, but it was gone once more. This happened a number of times before I took up my laptop, adjusted the settings to keep the screen on, and then popped it up to shine on the area I had seen the figure. And I fell asleep with no issues for the rest of the night. The next sighting was around 1 week later. I was watching Netflix this time as usual, and I heard my sister get up and walk into the kitchen and then come back, and I heard the lights click, meaning that she was finally going to bed. The time was around 11:45. Just outside my old room, to the immediate right, was the door to the bathroom, which had a nightlight to see when you woke up in the middle of the night, and the walls aren't super heavy duty, so when someone closes a door, the wall can shake if they don't close it nicely. That'll come into place soon. The way my bed and dresser was situated, my door was to the right, and I was tucked into the corner of my wall and dresser, so I had a backrest. With my laptop on my lap watching a show, I noticed out of the corner of my eye my door slowly open. I look expecting to see my sister, but as soon as I turned to look, the door slammed, shaking the wall I was leaning on. About half a second went by before that intense feeling of terror and dread came back, and I look up to find this phantom standing there smiling at me. As soon as I recognized it, I turned my laptop around and it was gone. Not wanting to deal with it again, turned Netflix off and called it a night. Now this is where activity really picks up. My weekends end and it's Sunday night, and I'm heading back to my uncle's so I can drop off stuff and head to work. I get back from work and play some video games for a few hours before going to bed at about 1 to 1:30. I was in a light sleep and at about 2:30 I woke up to the sound of whispering. The way I had the basement set up, I had my bed on the opposite end of the windows facing the street, and I had a couple of bookshelves at the foot of my bed behind the TV to kind of separate the rest of the room from my bed. On the opposite side of the bookshelves there's a couch to the left that I can still see from my bed, and the door to go to the hallway to the garage and the stairs to go up. I wake up from the whispering and start listening harder, thinking my uncle was still awake upstairs and on the phone or something. That's when I saw a head pop up over the bookshelves and look at me. As soon as I saw it, it popped back down for a handful of seconds before coming back up. I recognized it as the phantom and turned on the light over my bed, and it was gone. I turn on a movie on my TV and get comfortable enough to turn the light off, and eventually I drift back off to sleep. The movie ends and enough time passes that the TV and DVD player go to sleep mode. Again I wake up to the sound of whispering, and I quickly look around to find the phantom sitting on the arm of the couch, just staring and smiling. That intense feeling comes over me again, and for what felt like 10 to 15 minutes we just looked at each other, and eventually the phantom got up and walked out the door to the hallway. I fell back asleep for the rest of the night with no issue. The very next night the same thing happened again, but the only new thing was the sound of the phantom dragging something heavy across the floor, which to this day I cannot figure out what it was, unless it was moving the chairs and then moving them back. The events of those 2 nights became a commonplace thing for the next few months. By now, it was getting into late summer, and I was riding my motorcycle as much as I could until I had to park it due to the bad weather. I always had a spot on the end of my bookshelf for my keys and wallet. Every day, that is the spot they would end up, never anywhere else. I had Thursday off that day for some reason, so I was taking my time to prepare myself for the ride down to my mum's and then stop out at Jill's and see her and her parents for a bit. Earlier in the year, I had traded my old bike for a 2012 Ninja 650R, and I was excited to take it down. I go grab my key after putting my wallet in my jacket pocket, and I can't find it anywhere. I grabbed the spare and put it in my jacket just in case, and started checking my old pants. Nothing. I check under a pile of clean clothes I had yet to fold. Nothing. I check my car. Nothing. No nice regular keys anywhere. So I figure I'll look later, and I go down for the weekend and make note to everyone to please keep an eye out for it, because I can't find it. I go back to my uncle's not having found the key, and I kind of forget about it. Events with the Phantom go on as usual for about 3 weeks. I head back down to my mum's, and I make a stop on Friday, out at Jill's because she was off school. I get there and I help her do a laundry that's needed to be done, and we reach the bottom of an old pile. And lo and behold, there's my key. I don't know how it could have got there. Things go on as usual, and fast forward about another 4 months, Jill is taking the semester off school and gets a job at a place near where I live, so she starts staying a few nights at my uncle's with me. One night she's off work and watching a movie sitting on my bed when she told me she had noticed a shadowy figure pacing by the windows on the opposite side of the room. Now at this point, I had yet to tell her about the Phantom because I didn't want to freak her out or think I'm crazy. A few weeks go by, and randomly in the middle of the night she wakes up saying she's sorry. I asked her what she was sorry for, and she replied by saying that she's sorry that she kicked me. Me being tired, I responded saying it was okay, and she had asked to trade sides of the bed because she seemed to be a bit scared of something. I fall asleep for about an hour before I roll and kick something at the foot of the bed fairly hard. I knew it wasn't her because there was absolutely no give to what I had kicked. I quickly turned the light on above my bed, and we both look at the spot we had kicked, and the comforter was compressed and slowly rising as if whatever was sitting there had just gotten up. We both look at each other and decide to leave the light on and turn on a movie for the night. Some time goes by, and from a local restaurant my uncle got a Valentine's Day balloon that he then gave me, so I took it downstairs and let it go to the ceiling. A few nights go by, and it's just the usual Phantom antics, and I was thankful it didn't wake Jill up at all. Then another night when I was at work, and Jill was still at my uncle's watching movies with the light off work. There was a video of this on my old phone that she sent me, but when I recently checked the SD card, it got corrupted, so I lost the video. She was sitting on the bed when all of a sudden the balloon started bobbing up and down, making circles. It then bobbed and drifted over to where the Phantom usually sat on the arm of the couch, and circled there for a few minutes before moving to the foot of the bed where it had been sitting and started bobbing and circling for nearly 5 minutes before bobbing back to where the balloon started and not moving at all after that. I looked at the video on my break at work and called her to calm her down, and then when I got home I popped the balloon and threw it away. Again, the usual deal with the Phantom's antics for a few weeks, before Jill and I were watching a movie. She was sitting up eating fruits by the foot of the bed, and I was half laying against her holding her hands across her stomach. She has poor circulation, so her hands are always cold, and I didn't think much of it. Now, just a fun fact, she usually eats fruit with 2 hands. Out of nowhere I feel the hand, with fingers interlaced, grab my hand incredibly tight and jerk away. I look up in anger at her, but then I see her holding her fruit with both her hands. All she said was, "What?" with a very confused tone. I told her it wasn't nice to squeeze my hand and then jerk it away. After that, she gave me a very confused look, just wiggled her hand, saying that they had been there the whole time and she wasn't holding my hand. Thoroughly creeped out by this, we turned on all the lights and a movie before eventually falling to sleep. As more time went by, Jill returned to school full time and went back to live at her parents' house. I was still at my uncle's, working on what would be my last semester at school. Usually, things with the Phantom went by and nothing too more out of the ordinary happened. His visits were a nightly basis, and the new year came, and then it was April, and I decided to change schools and left my uncle's and moved into a portion of Jill's parents' house that we rented from them. It was at this point which my run-ins with the Phantom started to slow down a little bit, and I wasn't seeing him as close as I had seen before. Out of where they lived, there's a lot of old native Indian burial mounds, and some in crop fields that are no longer there, but that's a different story. Anyway, that winter my best friend was down at his parents' house for winter break, and his parents were having their house depraised, so he just wanted to stay out of the way, so we stayed at my mum's and hung out and played video games for 4 days. On the second night in, at last, before a long break of runnings with the Phantom, I gave my best friend the guest room, and I took the floor of the living room in the basement. I used a ton of blankets and built a sort of nest, so it was nice and comfortable. The way I was positioned at the head, there was a love seat that acted as a partition in the basement from workout equipment and the living room. To my left was a regular couch. At my feet was the TV, and behind the wall behind the TV was the guest room. The door to the guest room was just of the TV, and to the right of that was a small L-shaped hallway that went to the same direction as walking into the door to a small bathroom. I woke up in the night at 1:08 after not having been asleep for long. I check the time, then look around and look towards the hall, where I see the Phantom standing in the hall, peeking around the corner. We look at each other, and then the Phantom slowly walks down the half further and disappears into the dark. I fall back asleep, only to wake up again, this time 3 minutes later. The Phantom was squatting at the corner of my nest, just to the right of my feet. I whispered to him to please go away and leave me be. His smile got wider. He stood up and walked back to the dark. Eventually, I fell back asleep and woke up again at 4:08. This time I'm lying on my back, and on all fours over the top of me is the Phantom. His face 2 inches from mine, same slight green tint in his eyes, and a massive smile on his face. It felt like forever, but was really probably a minute, if that. Finally, he slowly got up and walked back to the hall, and before he disappeared, he turned back around and smiled again. And just like that, he was gone. At that point, he was gone for a few years. I thought there were maybe a few times where I saw him, but I was never 100% sure. Every time after that, when I had to go into my mum's basement, I would always get that same intense feeling, along with the feeling of being watched, but never saw him. Now we get to the part that was probably a bit dumb on my part. I was down in the basement for something, and I had this intense feeling before I finally said, "Alright, fine then, let's go." Just kind of asking it to follow me again, which kind of half worked at that point. On occasions I did start seeing the Phantom once more, but always from far away. Since then, I'm no longer with Jill, and I now rent an old farmhouse just outside the town where I grew up. Fast forward about 2 weeks. I got on the subject of skinwalkers with my mum, and it reminded me of the Phantom, and I was telling her about the stories too, just because it had been a while. I kind of thought it was odd That even though I had told the phantom to come along, that it never got too close, and I ended up telling my mum that. Even she had told me every now and then she would have an odd feeling when she was in the basement alone, late at night mostly. This kind of creeped me out, but I didn't think too much of it and eventually went home and relaxed, watched The Office with my dad. I moved him out there to keep an eye on him, being he has early onset Alzheimer's. No incidents that night at all. Now, this past Thursday, it was about 10:30. Things in the house were nice and quiet, and I was playing some Minecraft with my current girlfriend, using the phone to talk because that seems to work better for some reason. I had the volume off, just enjoying the quiet, and neither of us were chatting, when I heard a man's voice outside yell, "Hey." It sounded like he was trying to get someone's attention. I, at first, thought it could be my landlord coming over to check on the house and close up the barn for the night. But I remember he came over in his buggy a few hours earlier, and it was far too late for him to show up. Thinking someone's out there messing with the horses, I grabbed my super bright light and one of my carry pistols and put on my shoes to walk out. I'm enough out of town that the only close house is my landlord's, and then no one else for quite a ways. I flip on the light to the entry and walk out. As soon as I got outside, I noticed that everything is pitch black. All of a sudden, I get an intense feeling of dread. I shine my light all over looking for something. As I was around my truck, I head towards the barn and the horse pasture, where I heard the voice coming from. At this point, I have my trusty EDC out. I'm ready to rock and roll. I shine in the horse pasture, which is fairly flat, and I don't see anything. I don't even see the horse, which means she was probably in the barn or out in the lower pasture. I shine my light into some bushes and a tree between the house and fence. That's where I saw a shadowy figure nonchalantly walk from a bush to behind a tree. With that, I kept the light there for another moment before getting that intense feeling of dread wash over me again. So I head back to check on my dad, and inside all is well. I quickly lock the doors, draw closed all the blinds, and text my friend who lives in town that I may have someone outside my house. By this point in my life, I've seen enough normal things and never been so scared to the point where I don't even make a sound and just turn and rush back inside the house. My friend says to let me know if I want him to come out and drive by and shine a light around the road and see if anything pops up, and then walk around and look so I'm not alone out there in case it is something. I told him I locked the doors and closed the blinds, to which we agree that's probably good enough for now. I stay up for about another hour or so before deciding to return to bed. As I sat there calming down, I was trying to think of who could have yelled. I thought maybe the landlord walked over and didn't turn on any lights to disturb me, and he was further in the barn, where I couldn't see, and maybe he was trying to get one of the horses' attention. As soon as I start to think that it was probably the answer, I got that exact same feeling from when I saw the phantom, and I knew it was him again. I finally get up and go to bed. There's a window in my room that faces right to the tree where I saw the phantom walk to. Not wanting to be convinced it was him, even still, I got a surge of adrenaline and quickly rushed over and closed the blinds and situated it better so anyone outside couldn't see in. My whole body was on high alert till about 3 AM when I finally fell asleep. I woke up around 10:30 just straight exhausted and took it easy. I had my usual day off and relaxed. Now that Friday night it wasn't too late in the evening, but I got home from working out with my best friend and took a shower and got cleaned up before heading to my girlfriend's. In my bathroom there's a clock that's been dead since I moved in. I'm not sure why, I just never put batteries in it, and I just kept forgetting to do so. The clock had always read 9:07, because growing up whenever I took a shower, I would always check the time, and instinctively I would always check the clock even though it always read 9:07. Well, that night it was different. I got out the shower and the clock said 12 exactly. That brings me to just now. I was trying to think of how far this go back when I was telling my girlfriend about it, and it reminded me of a recurring dream I always had when I was 8. Whenever I would stay at my dad's apartment he had at the time, I would wake up and under my desk I would always see a face staring at me and smiling. So the first possible sighting would have been 17 years ago, but of that part I'm not sure, as it was so long ago. If anyone has any idea what this phantom could be, please comment and share. Over the years I've talked to my great aunt, who's very in tune with the spirits, and everything I've told her, she says that it could be a very bad and very powerful entity, possibly demonic. She said the key factors are the eyes, that it's tangible, and that it appears to more than just me, and the feeling it gave, to which I noticed. One night, I was sleeping. My husband was on night shift, my 3 kids were in their rooms fast asleep, and I was dreaming, although I can't remember what I was dreaming about. Suddenly, all the noises in my dream muted, and I heard an urgent but calm voice overhead coming from the sky saying, "Wake up, Amy. Wake up now. Someone is in the house. The kids, go get the kids." Immediately I awoke. I sat there in a daze, like, what a weird dream, and I went back to lie down, but I just had a feeling in my gut. I got out of bed and walked around the house. All was quiet. I went to my son's room. He was sleeping and safe. I then went to my daughter's room. I opened the door and saw a black shadow standing by her bed. I flicked the light switch on, and there, standing by my daughter, was a man I'd never seen before. I was so scared I jumped on her bed, covered her body with mine and just started screaming at him. The man hurried and jumped out the window, as our rooms are on the first floor. Her entire screen was bent and pulled out. He must have pulled the screen out and then opened the window, which wasn't locked. Luckily, my daughter woke up as I was screaming. She did not see the man. I called the police and my husband. Turns out the guy was a neighbor's brother. He'd been staying with him for the summer. He drank with my husband and neighbor and knew that my husband worked night shift and that we'd be home alone. When the cops interrogated him, he swore he had a drug habit and only broke in to steal items or money for drugs. He had no intention of hurting my daughter. I don't believe him. If that voice in my dream didn't wake me up, who knows what would have happened. The second time it happened, I was once again asleep. My husband was home sleeping next to me, and I was dreaming when again it all went quiet and the same calm but urgent voice said, "Wake up, Amy. Go to Nova. Nova is in trouble." Nova is my middle daughter. She was 5 at the time, and I woke up and flew into her room. Before I even switched the light on, I could hear her wheezing. She was having an asthma attack. I switched the light on and my poor baby's face was blue. Tears were streaming down her face. I ran her to the bathroom, got her inhaler, and I screamed for my husband to dial 911. She took her inhaler, but it was too much. Luckily, the ambulance arrived and got her to hospital. She was in there for 3 days. I can't explain why this warning happened during 2 occasions where my children were in danger. Maybe it's a form of mother's intuition. Maybe it's a dead relative. Who knows? Has anyone ever had anything like this happen to them? I'm a guy from the UK. I live in a town in Wales, albeit not the little villages most people imagine. My town is a proper holiday destination along the coast of Wales. This isn't relevant to the story, but I just thought I would give everyone some context. So it started when I was around 15 years old, 8 years ago. I was dating a girl from about 2 towns over. I would usually get the train to hers and back. However, this one night her family weren't supposed to be home, and we were kind of being watched by her brother, who was about 20 and pretty chill. The plan was to stay the night. We were up late playing on the Wii, but her parents unexpectedly came home. I never got along with her mother, and the whole thing kind of got heated, and I was kicked out the house and told I could not stay over. It was about 2 a.m, and I didn't want to call my own parents in worry of waking them. My mother is a very strict woman, so I began the long trudge home. It was roughly an hour and a quarter worth of walking, so I was expecting to be home around 4:30. So I was walking along the concrete part above the beach, and I stopped after about a half hour of walking, as there is a public toilet which is kind of run down, but also open 24 hours to those desperate, which I was. I was expecting it to be empty, or just have a homeless dude sleeping in it, but I was wrong. There was a guy using the urinal. This guy looked to be in his mid to late 50s, a little on the overweight side, but not morbidly. He had grey, messy-ish hair, but other than that, he looked pretty normal. He definitely didn't look homeless. I remember he made a quick joke about something, but I don't remember what. I politely laughed, did my business, and left. After about 15 more minutes of walking, the weather had gotten pretty bad. It started to rain heavily, and the wind was picking up. I seem to remember this was around November time, so it was pretty cold. I'm walking, and a car drives by, beeps and pulls over just in front of me. I had assumed it was someone I know, but couldn't think who. I got in the car and the dude from the toilets was inside. He asked me where I was heading, and I told him. He said that was a long walk, and I couldn't be expected to walk all that way in this weather, and he offered me a lift. In hindsight, I probably should have refused, but the weather was bad, and at the time he wasn't giving off any weird vibes. The drive took about 15 minutes, I think, maybe 20. The more I was in the car with him, the more I started to get vibes that there was something off. He was telling me his best friend was a 14-year-old lad who stays over at his place a lot, and they drink together, and if I ever wanted to join in, I was welcome to. He was asking me some really invasive questions as well. I don't fully remember what they were. I just remember it's not the kind of questions you ask to someone that you're giving a simple lift home to. Anyway, we got to the street around the corner from my place, and I asked him to just drop me off there. I told him my house wasn't accessible by the road, and that I would just walk the rest of the way home. He gave me his number and told him to ring him when I got back to my house safely, as he wanted to make sure I got home okay. I asked him what his name was. At this point he knew my full name, and he just said, Pete. Pete what? My phone wants a surname. He wouldn't tell me. He just kept saying, just Pete. I later found out that Pete was a fake name too. Anyway, I got into my house and texted him just to let him know I was home safe. It was probably a bad decision, but back then I was full of bad decisions. The next day came and I was expecting everything to go back to normal. But it didn't, because I stupidly gave Pete my number when I texted him. I started to get texts from him every morning, basically just saying good morning and wishing me well. I replied to the first few, and then started ignoring them. So that's when he tried calling me. Every single evening. I would ignore most of his calls, but he would often repeatedly ring until I answer. He was sending me these texts, inviting me over to his house for some drinks, and he kept telling me he'd just gotten himself a pool table and wanted me to come and play with him. He was telling me a story of a friend he was playing pool with, the 14-year-old one I was talking about, and accidentally let slip the guy called him John. I collared him on this and said, I thought your name was Pete. Oh no, my friend's name is John. You just said your friend called you John, and you told me your friend was called Tom. Oh, Well, some people call me John. It's like a nickname. He hesitated saying this too, and it clicked in my mind that he was lying to me. I kept refusing, but he kept asking. After a while, my mum wanted to know who this dude who kept texting me was. I told her, and she rang him herself from her phone and told him that if he carried on texting and ringing me, she would be calling the police. I didn't get any more texts from him after that, but it didn't end there. I had a routine, you see, and he knew it. I always walked my dog at 4:30 every afternoon and played with her for 40 minutes on the field at the end of my street, just near where he had dropped me off. I had started to notice his car pulling up there within 5 minutes of me getting there with my dog. He had tinted windows, but I would always notice the car lights were on and left on, and the engine was always running. I recognized his car and would occasionally notice the car door open and a large flash from that direction, as if someone were taking pictures. I started changing the time I walked my dog, but he would eventually figure it out and start showing up either earlier or later to coincide with me walking her. This went on for months. I never mentioned it to anyone, but one day it just stopped. He stopped pulling up on the side of the field, and I never saw his car again. No text messages or phone calls, it just stopped. I ended up getting a new phone after about a year, and had that for another 2. I dug out my old empty phone when I was around 18 to 19, after the aforementioned dog passed away. I had some old pictures and videos of her on that phone and wanted to transfer them over to my PC so that I always had them. I turned on the phone, which had been off for several years now, and still had the old SIM card in it. That's when I got my final message from Pete. It was an old one and was about 14 months old. It said something along the lines of, "Hi, I know we haven't spoken in a while, but I've just thought you should know that over New Year's I was diagnosed with an illness and I've been told I don't have long left. You were such a good friend in the short time we knew each other. I live at," and he sent me his address, "and would really appreciate it if you could come around just so that I could have one last chat. I've got some beers. If you want to stay the night, you can. Just drop me a line if you want to come round so that I can get everything ready for you. See you soon." No idea if Pete/John was genuinely ill or just trying to lure me to his house. I've never been to the address he sent me and never responded to him or heard from him since. I didn't reply to him, and that was the last I heard from the guy. It certainly had a big impact on me during those years. I don't know if he's gone, but I do know I never would want to meet him again. I live in Australia. My house is on a hill and has an upstairs and a downstairs. I have the downstairs part, which has a kitchen, a fridge, dining room, bedroom with a TV, lounge and bed. One important fact is that I have a side yard above my sloped backyard, which can be accessed through the garage into the downstairs through a storage hallway. So, it all starts around yesterday, as I was trying to get to sleep. I swear I could have heard footsteps pacing around the side yard. I brushed it off, as I own 2 dogs, and it was probably just them. I woke up, however, to find one shoe in the yard. It was an old Nike runner shoe, covered in dirt. I have 2 dogs, so I put 2 and 2 together and thought they'd found a shoe in the backyard and dropped it on the side of the yard, which is nothing out the ordinary. Fast forward to tonight. It's about midnight. I'm watching something on YouTube and I decide to call it a night. But I was hungry, so I got up to raid my fridge. But as I opened the door to my room, to the kitchen, there was an absolutely horrifying, skinny, wrinkly bearded man staring at me in the middle of the room. He looked like a crackhead that ran out of ice. And we have a crystal meth epidemic over here. He was wearing a 4-beer singlet with blue short pants, I promptly crapped myself hard and yelled out and tripped backwards onto my ass. And as soon as I laid an eye on him, he ran off through the storage hallway and disappeared into the night. At first, I honestly didn't know what just happened. I thought it was some kind of ghost. So I get up and shut the door behind me and run upstairs to my parents. They go down and say the place was trashed and the door to the side yard was wide open, even though I had locked it. That's when it hit me. I had stumbled across an intruder. But when I left the downstairs, nothing other than a chair was knocked over or moved. But when I came back down, a lot of the stuff on the counter was moved or thrown off, as well as chairs and a vacuum cleaner, meaning that he came back into the house and trashed the place in the span of a minute and a half. Nothing of value in my bedroom was taken, luckily, as I had a laptop and phone in there. The door was still closed, but from my kitchen drawer, one of the large kitchen knives were missing. We of course called the police, and they went looking for him. They say his description matches with a burglar who's on the run in the area. I think that since I closed the door behind me, when I went upstairs, he thought I was still in the room, and therefore didn't go in. But that's just my theory. But it's almost surreal knowing how close I was to potentially losing my life with my own kitchen knife in my own house. Either way, let's not meet again. This story starts around the fall of 2017. I was walking back down to work from lunch when I passed this girl and noticed she got up and began to walk behind me. She took a different route and didn't follow me, and a few days later it happened again, but this time she was following me. I assumed she wasn't following me at the time because where my office building is situated, you have to go up a set of stairs and pass a few other buildings, and she did not follow me into my building. After a while, I noticed we took the same train home. A lot of the time she would be watching me. When we made eye contact, she'd look away. Then she'd continue looking when she thought I wasn't looking. There's a Whole Foods across from my office. I went there for lunch a few times during the week. I started seeing this girl sitting in the window for lunch, and she would almost always get up as soon as I left and walked the way I did. Around this time, I began seeing her more frequently. During lunchtime, or when I got the metro, she was almost always there. After a few months of this, I started noticing that she would get off at the same station as me sometimes. Sometimes she would walk the same way as me. Once I got to my place, she would always pass but never followed me up to the entrance. During this time, I started receiving phone calls at work from random phone numbers that, at the time, I assumed were spam. There would either be silence on the end, or the person would hang up immediately. I also started receiving fake Facebook requests from people I already knew or were already on my friends list. December of 2017 comes by. By this time, I'm not going to Whole Foods as often. If she gets off at the same station as me, I go into a restaurant or go shopping for groceries before I go home. Around this time, an old friend I went to high school with contacts me, kind of out the blue. She said she wanted to follow me on Instagram. We texted a few times and I accepted her follow request. She contacts me again about a month later from a different number, but this time she's texting me frequently. I'm talking about every day/every other day. I'm not one to be mean or show when I'm annoyed too often, but after months of this, when she starts asking me if she's texting me too frequently, I don't hesitate to tell her that she could lay off a bit. She stops for a week or so, then begins texting me frequently again. This whole ordeal should have sent up red flags for several reasons. During this time, she would ask me so many random questions, like when you would do when you're trying to get to know someone. She would ask for selfies, which I declined to as I don't like taking pictures of myself, and I would tell her that there are plenty of pictures of me on Facebook. She would ask what I'm doing on the weekends and the names of my friends on occasion, which I wouldn't tell her because I thought it was weird that she'd want to know my friends' names. I only sent her a couple of videos of fun things I'd do, but that was it. August 2018 rolls around. I'm still seeing Creepy Girl everywhere during the week. I get pulled into my boss's office, and he says that a few co-workers received fake screenshots from Facebook of me talking badly about them. Now, I've never posted on Facebook and would never talk crap about my co-workers on social media. I don't have a grudge with anyone, nor do I know of anyone who has a problem with me. I'm a fairly easygoing guy. I managed to clear things up with everyone involved and still had my job. Of course, my friend is still texting me fairly frequently, and I tell her what happened a few days later when I get home from work. I tell her I don't want to go too much into it, but she keeps badgering me for details. When I finally let it spill, I was going to bed, and she got the message. The more I thought about all the times she texted me, the more uneasy I got. Something that she said just didn't make sense, especially from the way I remember it. We had kept in touch over the years, just not as frequently, and we hadn't touched bases for a while before I heard from her in December. A couple of weeks later, I decided to reach out to my friend on Instagram, but the Instagram she last messaged me from wasn't there. However, there was still an Instagram for her that I followed, and that followed me back. I reached out to her and asked her what a phone number was. The phone number was completely different, and it turns out she was never the one texting me, nor did she request following me on Instagram. I tracked the number, and it turns out to be from one of those fake phone number apps. I requested to be blocked from the service, and I never heard from my friend again. After talking about it with my brother and a few friends, I'm almost certain it was the girl that'd been following me. These things only started after she appeared. The phone calls to my office, the fake Facebook friend requests, and a few days before I was pulled aside by my boss, my friend texted me and told me she had a weird feeling about me and wanted to make sure I was okay. I just thought she was being weird at the time and tried not to think too much of it. This whole ordeal is really scary when I looked back on it, because I sent videos of myself and my address at one point. My friend even confirmed a post my brother made with pictures he tagged me on Facebook. I was texting a stranger for 8 months about my life, and they also apparently have access to my Facebook page. I still see this girl since she obviously works in the same area as me. She doesn't follow me around as much, but when she does see me on the metro, she always watches me or sits somewhere she'll be able to make eye contact with me. I'm always careful now if anyone texts me from an unrecognizable phone number, and I'm just paranoid. I know this story might seem a bit all over the place, especially with the conclusion I came to of the girl posing as my friend, but I had to get this off my chest. So Creepy Girl who's been following me, staring at me, and most likely catfished me, I don't ever want to meet you again. I really don't know why I didn't suspect my friend wasn't really her at the start. She obviously had my phone number, and she knew my mom and brother's name, where I went to college, and the fact that we went to high school together. So you can see why it was very convincing. This happened in 2007, when I was 19. I was attending college in what I thought was a very safe southern town with a population of about 30,000 people. I was lucky enough to have a modest place to myself because my family owned property in a suburban area that they no longer used. The house was very small but sat in the middle of a 2-acre fenced lot with a lot of pine trees and shrubbery. So Saturday night, some friends picked me up and we went to a few parties. Hung out at their house, nothing major. They dropped me back off at my house around 1 a.m. I had 2 dogs that usually sleep in my room, but this night they were being restless, so I put them in the living room and closed my bedroom door so they couldn't keep bothering me, and I instantly fell asleep. A few hours later, I awoke and saw a man climbing in my bedroom window through the shades. My bed was pushed completely up against the wall by the window, so by the time I saw him, he already had a knife to my throat and a hand over my mouth. I don't think I intentionally left the window unlocked, but I'm a 5'11" girl and was almost out of reach from the ground. It was also incredibly narrow, maybe 1 to 1.5 feet high, 3 feet across. It never even crossed my mind that someone would or could break in through that window. My first feeling was absolute rage. I remember that more than anything, I could instantly tell I had no idea who he was. His cheeks were really hollowed out, and he was very thin. He was also older than me, maybe in his 30s. He said, "If you don't scream, I won't kill you." His voice was so calm. I remember later thinking that his tone was so normal, we could have been discussing the weather. He took his hand off my mouth, and he was bleeding from his fingernails. I told him I had money I could give him. He could have my car, and I just started rambling on about any possessions I think I had. He said, "That's not what I'm here for." To cut the conversation short, this lunatic held me down for 5 minutes or more, just talking to me. I asked him things like how he knew I was there, and he said it was a lucky guess. By then my dog started freaking out in the living room, and he seemed to get a little unnerved. He became more serious and started groping me, and told me to lay down. I had bunched myself into the corner, you see. When he let go of me just for a second, I was able to push him off and dive headfirst out my window. When I fell, I landed on a metal lawn chair that he'd dug up from the yard. I was only sleeping in my underwear when this happened, so in addition to all the scrapes on my mouth, my whole body got pretty bruised and scuffed from the fall. I immediately got up and ran as quickly as I could to my neighbor's house, who happened to be a state trooper. Time has never been slower than it was when I was standing outside banging on his front door. When he answered the door, I quickly told him what happened, and he grabbed a bulletproof vest, a weapon, and ran towards my house. His wife called 911 and gave me some clothes and helped me clean up a little. Running had taken a layer of skin off the bottom of my feet, and I had left bloody footprints on their carpet. They never found out who it was. My friend that dropped me off said they saw a man with red hair walking down my road. It was too dark in my room for me to know what the color of his hair was exactly. I could tell he was left-handed by the way he held the knife. The police were beyond unhelpful. They only told me that he had to have been watching me for a while to know that I lived there alone and which room was mine. A few years later, a man was arrested for a previously unsolved charge in 2005 of a girl a few miles from my place. He was never charged with anything relating to her end in 2005, but his semen was found at the crime scene and he lived in her building. He also had red hair and was left-handed. Moral of the story: lock your windows. Before I share my mum's experience, I feel like a little bit of background is necessary for you to understand, as my family's history is important. We are from a small town in Arizona. I was born there, but I've lived in the city since I was 5. My parents were born and raised there, as were their parents. The town has a slew of paranormal activity, maybe having something to do with it being known as an outpost of some sort for Spanish soldiers during the war. I honestly don't know which one, but it was several hundred years ago. There are rumors of witchcraft and many witches living there even to this day. It has a cemetery on a hill that is so old it has been condemned. You can literally fall through the ground and through an old coffin if you venture there, and the graves are so old that all the remains are piles of rocks. There are no markers of any kind, except for a few splintered, rotted wooden crosses. The house that my great-grandparents lived in was built somewhere in the mid-1800s. My mum grew up in the house, right next door. Many relics from the war have been discovered in this town, and when my mum was a preteen, she says her neighbours who were extremely poor, as they had dirt floors and always wore tattered clothing, discovered a chest of Spanish coins, both gold and silver, while digging a new septic tank. They became very wealthy overnight and moved away, but according to my mum, the family is still very well off. My family had somewhat of a dark history on my mum's side, and after her grandparents both died, her mum was cleaning out their house and discovered 2 voodoo doll type things that they believed were responsible for her parents, my mum's great-grandparents' death. I'm just trying to give you a little bit of background info. My mum has also always been ultra-sensitive. Her intuition is almost always spot on, and she has spent her life hearing and seeing apparitions and spirits from a young age, and also has dreamt of all sorts. Some of them about people who have already passed, some predicting deaths and other significant events in her life. She passed on some of these traits to me, and she says I am also sensitive based on some of my dreams and experiences. She's told me several times of a dream she has while spending the night at her grandparents' home. She said that there was nothing significant about that day or night that she can remember. She was about 13 years old at the time. She went to bed around 9, which was normal after helping cleaning up the kitchen, where she stayed and slept in the guest bedroom. And since all her aunts moved away and had their own families, she was alone in the room. The dream started as if she had just woken up in a strange place. She said that immediately a pungent, musty smell hit her nostrils, and it was so dark she could hardly see her hand in front of her. When she lifted her hand to look at it, she heard the sound of a chain rattle and felt something cold and heavy on both wrists. After feeling them, she realized they were thick shackles, and they were attached to the wall behind her, so her movement was limited. She started to feel the rest of her body, and she said she didn't feel like herself. She was extremely thin. She could feel her ribs sticking out, and she wasn't wearing any clothes. Her hair was cut very short and uneven from what she could feel, and her face felt very thin as well. Her cheekbones were also sticking out. She noticed that she could faintly hear the sound of men's voices and the sound of horses, but it was far from where she was. It smelled dank and faintly like horse manure, and the floor she was sitting on was dirt. The wall felt hard, like clay or some type of concrete. She started telling herself this, that she was just dreaming, but she couldn't escape how real it felt. The smell, the sounds, the weight of the shackles and chains. About the time she started to hear the other chains rattling nearby, as if there were others that were chained up as well. She could hear them whimper and cry, but no one near her used any words. At that point, a feeling of complete terror and dread hit her, like she knew she would never escape or be rescued and she would perish there. She started to look around, and she said she couldn't see anything besides or in front of her, but when she looked up, all she could see was a small window or opening about 2 feet by 2 feet, and it had 4 to 5 vertical bars on it. It must have been at least 50 feet up from the floor, so there was no way she could reach it or look out of it. She realized that's where the voices and the sounds of horses were coming from. She started to panic and pulled the chains, tugged at the shackles, but to no avail. Neither would budge. She was trapped and there was no way out. At that point, she had told herself she had been dreaming and tried everything she could think of to wake herself up. She bit herself on the hand, pinched herself, and even slapped herself, but nothing would wake her up. After what felt like hours of this, she resorted to just bawl her head off and laid down crying herself to sleep. She woke up in the bed that she had fallen asleep in, which was at her grandparents' house. When she opened her eyes, her cheeks and pillows were wet with tears, and her heart was pounding in her chest. She said she felt that horrible panic and fear for several minutes, until she realized she was awake and in the room she fell asleep in. She immediately got up and went to her grandparents' room. It was early, but they were already awake. She proceeded to tell them everything about the dream in detail. Her grandpa, who she was very close to, hugged and comforted her, reassuring her that she had just had a nightmare, that everything was okay, and she just had a vivid imagination. When she went home later and told her mom, she told her the same thing, that it was her imagination. It took her a few days to get over it, but eventually she forgot about the dream and didn't think about it again until several years later. As I mentioned to you before, my great-grandparents' house that they lived and died in was really old. Growing up, it was always in need of some kind of repair. The roof and the walls were always being worked on. My mum said she was pregnant with me, so she was about 22 when the floor needed to be redone. And it was no easy job. The entire floor required to be torn out. By this time, both of her grandparents had already passed. Her parents lived in the house. My uncle and a couple of cousins were skilled carpenters, so they decided to do the job. My grandparents and my 2 uncles had to move out for about a week in order for the repairs to be completed. This is the part that freaks me out to this day. My grandma said the floor had never been redone up to that point, so she didn't know when the original floor was made. What they found has remained an open family secret for 40 years, but to this day no one speaks of it. When the floor was completely torn out, my uncle expected to find dirt underneath it. Instead, it looked like a boarded-up cellar. It was empty, but there was an opening in the corner that resembled a shaft of some sort. The cellar floor was made of some type of old wood and was rotted, so they decided to tear it out as well. There wasn't dirt under that floor either, but another room. It was said that there were 4 floors underneath in total, all of them pretty much empty, besides some old saddles and horseshoes, and some old wine bottles and that sort of thing. But on the very last level, deep underground, there was a room with a dirt floor, with shackles on the walls, and some skeletons still bound by the shackles. There were actual bodies underneath the house. According to my mum, my uncles and cousins got pretty spooked, and they ended up covering everything. The bodies are still there. They didn't want to disturb them. They built a new floor, and no one talks about it anymore. When word reached my mum of what had been found, she immediately remembered her dream. She now knew that she had experienced something that really happened a long time ago. So I guess it wasn't really a dream, more like a glimpse of the past or some sort of time travel. She always cries when she talks about it. As for the house, it's still there and was occupied by my grandma till she passed away back in 2014. The property still belongs to the family, but the house has been condemned. The roof caved in a few years ago. All I know, if it ever leaves the family and is sold, someone is in for a real surprise should they decide to tear it down. So that's my mum's story. I hope you enjoyed. I lived in a pretty average middle-upper-class neighborhood. 2 sides of my house were flanked by an old overgrown Christmas tree farm, and we were at the end of a quiet street. For some reason I had taken to leaving my window open at night for fresh air, and it was a good thing this sort of short-lived habit hit when it did. At 1 a.m. I hear this car door slam shut, and I think it's weird. We're the only house accessible here. 2 guys got out and they crossed our lawn to the side of the house that faces the farm and stood near a window to my dining room. Another sedan pulls up and 2 more guys get out. One has a chain and rope. At this point I try to wake my alcoholic parents, who assure me I was just having a bad dream. I go downstairs and watch them out the window for a bit while they're chatting and smoking. One goes to the farm and comes back. I try to wake my parents up, but now they're up and my mum's got the window open. My dad's loading his gun and has the police on the line. Something tips the dude off. Honestly, it was probably me shouting at my parents, and they leave right before the cops pull up. The cop tells us he'd up patrol and left. Makes me wonder why I slept with the windows open. I let me hear them all show up. When I was 15, Ray William Johnson was the most subscribed YouTube channel out there. I feel it necessary to say now that he was not the YouTuber that this story is about, but I feel it's important to include it for context. Doing some research before sharing this, he was the first YouTube channel to reach 5 million subscribers, so he was very popular at the time. In his show, he reviewed viral videos, and as a teenager, it was one of my favorite things to watch. Every week, he picked one subscriber video to provide the comment question of the week, to which his subscribers would provide responses in the comment section. A friend and I thought we had a great question featuring her new baby iguana to ask and sent it in every week after filming it. By the 4th or 5th week, our video was selected and aired on that week's show. In hindsight, there definitely wasn't that much traffic coming into my account, but at the time it really felt like it. I had 30-some messages in my message box at the time, and quite a few comments on the original video. I can confidently say, let's not meet to anyone in that comment section, garnering such classy comments such as, I'd tap the both of you at the same time. I would do both, and the iguana can watch. My friend at the time was 13 years old, and my message box did not look much different. Now as a teenager with low self-esteem, I was pleased with a lot of this new attention. I was actually taking the time to respond to a lot of my messages, ignoring the disgusting ones and thanking people for congratulating me on getting picked, and occasionally starting up a conversation with some internet strangers. One of the most common questions I got asked after this video was, how old are you? And of course I offered up that information readily. One specific person sticks out because he continued talking to me. Constantly. Every day. I would have a new message from him, and I would respond. He was just chatting. Just being nice, I thought. He had a YouTube account, small, but had a couple of thousand subscribers. Having had 11 myself, all of which being my friends, I thought it was so cool that his channel was successful. He asked me how old I was. I told him I was 15, and he told me he was 21. It was initially quite tame conversation, but after a few weeks he asked me for my phone number. I was naive. I gave it to him because he was nice, and he didn't live anywhere near me. From what he told me, we lived several states away. Then the texting started, and he tried calling me. Around here is where I started getting creeped out. He began talking about wanting to meet me. Now at this point I'd seen To Catch a Predator in school, and I started getting somewhat suspicious. I never gave him more information than the state I lived in, and my first name. That seemed innocent enough. But he started getting flirty and creepy, and generally uncomfortable to talk to. I slowly stopped responding, ignored the phone calls and said I was busy. Then he found my social media accounts and started talking to me there. I told him that I had gotten a boyfriend, which was a lie, but he still sent me some generally discomforting messages, especially looking back. This guy made me so uncomfortable that even thinking about it now or seeing his username makes me feel nauseated and tense. The message that really got me was one that finally scared me enough, and the one I actually can remember after all those years. It said, I'm coming to Ohio, and I'm gonna find you, And when I do, I'm gonna hug you so hard I'm gonna squeeze until your eyes pop out your little head. Smiley face. I never told my parents, but I was lucky enough to be able to get my phone number changed. I started getting paranoid that he would find me, checking the locks, closing the curtains. I removed him from some social media, changed my username and display names to make myself harder to find. Because, I was a teenager and my priorities were to be in contact with my actual friends at all times. Surprisingly, it got quiet for a while, and slowly I gained some feelings of safety back. I actually even started a new YouTube channel at the recommendation of some friends and started putting myself out there again, doing more media productions which I love, and garnering a small following of about 1,200 strangers. A few years down the road, I was starting freshman year of college. I had just turned 18, and wouldn't you know, he found me again. He followed me on all my social media, sent me messages again, and posted some comments on my old YouTube channel all at once. I felt sick. I remembered all the creepy messages and unsettling feelings, and just general breathlessness I had when he started telling me he would find me and that he was coming for me. I had a brief panic attack before swiftly blocking him on everything. My profile pictures were me at my new college, wearing the gear and everything. I would have been significantly easier to find now, and I knew that. I hardly made any friends that first year of college. I didn't leave my room much after that happened, and I never went to parties. I scarcely made any friends, and every so often I remember the experience and get sick. This is one of those times. I've since graduated. I've moved far away with my boyfriend. I still check my locks and curtains aggressively every night, sometimes 3 to 4 times a night, even if I'm sure I've done it. What I'll never understand is how a grown man at 21 would be interested in a 15-year-old girl, and especially still be interested after several years. The entire memory repulses me. He still posts to that YouTube channel, and all I can think about is how he tried to get me when I was a minor. He was a predator. He took away my sense of safety, and up to this point he's certainly on my top 10 people with whom I wish to never have an encounter with again. This happened while I was an undergraduate student. It was summer, and I recently moved out of the dorms. I was excited for the freedom, but most excited to have our family dogs come live with me. He was my best friend, and the worst part of college was being away from him. I was the first to move into the house out of my friends. However, they would always come over to pre-game before they wanted to head to the bars. One night after drinking shenanigans, we stumbled our way back home. Me, being fairly drunk, headed off to bed with my dog trotting behind me. I left my friends to sleep on the couch. In my room, I had my bed against the wall with the door. The foot of the bed faced the doors. The light switch was next to the door above the foot of my bed. My dog's bed was on the opposite room. He had a good view of the whole room, and he wasn't allowed on my bed, but he really loved his dog bed and preferred to sleep there. I don't know what time this happened, but the light in my room turned on. I sleepishly roll over and see this big mannish figure standing over me. The next thing I hear was my dog going crazy, barking, growling, and just being incredibly fierce. The figure sprinted out of my room with my dog on his tail. That was the last I ever saw of him. My friend who was sleeping in the living room was like, "A man just ran out of here. We had no idea who he was." We didn't call the cops till next morning. We should have called them that night, but we were young, dumb, and buzzed, and I was underage. We did notice the next morning my iPod and wallet were missing. A friend found my ID on the street a week later, but we can't figure out why he'd come to my room and turned the light on. He passed my friends to get to my room, and the light would be seen from where they were sleeping. The one thing I do know is that my dog stopped whatever worse bad things could have happened. That evening, when we returned to bed, he jumped on my bed and laid next to me. I knew he would never let anything happen to me. So to the strange, mysterious man in my house, let's not meet. I don't think my dog will let you escape again. During high school, my bedroom was in the basement. It was a finished basement, probably done in the 80s. My bed was near the bottom of the stairs. The floor was cheap linoleum on concrete. My parents were away for the weekend, so I had the house to myself. I was responsible, no big deal. They left me $40 for food. Anyway, I shoot out of bed after hearing a metal crash. It sounded like someone was coming down the stairs fast, tripped, and dropped whatever they were carrying. I'm sitting upright in the dark, trying not to move and listening for any sign of who it is. My first thought is, did someone break in upstairs and try to carry everything down and through the garage? 20 seconds go by, but it feels like an hour. I can't hear anything, so I get up and turn on the light. I am astounded by what is in front of me. I can't acknowledge it. It's in my head. It's not real until I say it out loud. I whisper, spoons? Dozens of spoons, forks, knives. My brain can't process this at 3 a.m. I'm standing there swaying, staggering, dumbfounded that at my feet are utensils. It took me a good 5 minutes to finally figure out that a box of old silverware had somehow shifted in the storage above the stairs. It fell down and tumbled down the stairs, spilling its contents all the way down. Strangest sound in the middle of the night, and definitely the strangest thing I've ever had to wake up to. A few years back, sometime in 2015, it was a regular morning, and me and my family were at home. My family is very small, the only ones being me, my sister, and my mum. My mum at the time was cooking me and my sister pancakes for breakfast, around 11 a.m, when suddenly we hear the doorbell. Might I mention, me and my sister are both disabled. We're both in wheelchairs due to being born with a disability that doesn't allow us to walk or anything of the sort, so we really are quite dependent on our mother for protection. Anyway, we get a ring at the doorbell, but we ignore it since we aren't expecting anyone and we don't answer the door to solicitors. A few seconds after that, the doorbell rings again, and the three of us don't really think much of it, but we thought it was a bit weird, so a few minutes pass and the doorbell is still going. Now we're a little bit scared, and when we suddenly started hearing rustling in the windows outside, my mum decided to open it. When she did, there was an Asian girl in her late teens attempting to pull the frame off our window. She had a blue Walmart bag filled with God knows what, but it looked heavy. The girl immediately stops what she's doing, and my mum yells, "What do you think you're doing?" She backs away from the window. We had noticed a strange black truck parked right in front of our house, and we could see two other people waiting inside it. We live in a small neighborhood and are unfamiliar with this truck. So the girl backs away and says, is Michelle here? My mum says, "There's no Michelle here, get away from our house." My mum was swearing a lot because she was scared. It was just us at home, and there was no one to protect us. I was really scared. My sister was crying while we ate our pancakes, and the girl immediately ran off as my mum got louder, and she just kept on asking for Michelle. The girl ran to the mysterious black truck and it peeled off. My mum began freaking out and called the police. She gave them her description, but they never came to investigate. That day, my mum made an appointment to get us ADT home security. That night we all slept in her bed, because the room that the Asian girl was taking the window off was mine and my sister's room. My mum stayed up all night, walking around the house with her axe. No one tried getting in after that. And the next day, we got our home security with cameras and all that. Since then, no one ever tried getting in again. After talking to our neighbors about this, we learned that these mysterious intruders were returning. The same people robbed our neighbors. They weren't home at the time of the robbery, but they caught it on their cameras. They stole a few things, then left. Thank goodness we were safe though. So dear Asian girl asking for Michelle, let's never meet again. I'm a woman in my early 20s who had, at the time, long, bright pink hair all the way down my back. Because of this, I'm very easy to spot in crowds and from afar. My best friend and I were traveling the French and Italian Riviera. Before going, my overly protective parents had been ranting about Taken, the movie, which only seemed laughable to me. We had been traveling for 6 days at that point, exploring Monaco, Menton, and Ventimiglia by foot. We had mostly had an amazing journey. The creepiest things we had encountered were so far catcallers and men that both looked and acted like they had never seen a woman before. But it was all fine. The thing that happened on our last night, however, really shook us to the core, given how we had just let our guard down since the city of Menton had turned out to feel so safe. It felt like this event came completely out of nowhere. The false confidence that made us feel like we could deal with anything could have really put us in danger that night. So to begin, the evening went like it had since we arrived. After adventuring all morning and then slacking at the beach all afternoon, we had made ourselves pretty and presentable again to have a little dinner by the beach promenade. After some cocktails and wine, we were both pretty buzzed, and we had agreed that the first thing we would order at the wine bar we were planning on going to next would be a big bottle of water to share. We had been going to this wine bar for 3 nights in a row. It was situated in one of the busier and more touristy streets where most shops were kept open till midnight. We walked there from the promenade giggling and having a great time as usual. After being greeted by the server, who was happy to see us again, we got ourselves seats at a table outside of the bar facing the busy street, where we could enjoy the late evening breeze as well as people watch. We were pretty used to men staring at us at that point, both young and old. I had developed pretty good tunnel vision while outside, and I tended to not look directly at men unless they were standing directly in my way or if I accidentally space out or something. After we had ordered our wine, cheese, and water bottle, my friend went to the bathroom inside. I sat facing the street and I was checking my phone, and when I randomly looked up, I met the eyes of a bald man in the midst of passing by. He was very tall, wore dark glasses, and blue and white striped nice-looking shirt. He also wore some expensive-looking dark leather shoes, and had a clock that also looked quite pricey around his wrist. In other words, he looked pretty anonymous at the Riviera, nicely dressed, but also kind of strange as he wore white socks in that temperature. We got eye contact as he was walking by, and then stopped for a second while holding the gaze, and then started walking again, only to look right back at me. Naturally, I looked away, and then he seemingly left, and I did not think any more of it. After my friend had returned from the bathroom, and we had tasted the different sorts of cheese and Italian prosciuttos, I looked up to see him standing there again, leaning on a wall across the street. 15 minutes must have passed, but once again I caught him looking at us with his phone aimed in our direction, held upright, as if he was taking pictures. I started getting the creeps, so I just casually asked my friend, who sat with her back towards him, if she had noticed him before also. She declined, and I tried to explain that he seemed to be lurking at us, but that at least he must have been aware that we'd seen him. Thinking that would be enough to make him lose interest, I told her to act like nothing and just forget about it, while we would continue to enjoy our last night at the Riviera. Every now and then, however, I would catch him staring at us, only to then nonchalantly start texting on his phone or look away. Something just really irked me about how he was trying so hard to pretend he was doing everything else. I finally let my friend know that he was still there, and she started freaking out more visibly than me, turning around all the time very obviously for him to see. The man started pacing around, picking up the phone to his ear without speaking. I could tell there was no light on the screen, and I was starting to become not only uncomfortable but kind of angry too, so I stared directly back at him, just to make goddamn sure that I knew he was watching us. At this point, I picked up my phone irritated, pretended to take pictures of the cheese platter, but actually of him just for proof in case he was trying anything strange. More than an hour had passed at this point, and the tiny doubt that I had that he maybe was just waiting for someone started to diminish. In just an hour, most of the shops and restaurants would be closing, including the wine bar we sat in. He definitely wasn't waiting for anyone, and I knew that eventually we would have to leave for the hotel. But what if he were to follow us? What if that's what he was waiting for? Eventually he walked up the street and had seemed to disappear. I felt relieved, but did not put my guard down yet, and just 10 minutes later he came walking back down the street again, pretending like nothing happened. Now we were both starting to get more scared, and we saw how the street became less and less crowded and how shops were starting to close down. The man looked at us from further down the street, and when he seemed to have become aware that we noticed him again, he vanished into a shop, waited for a few minutes, and then came out again without having bought anything, looking at us like before. We were really questioning what to do at this point, as well as what he wanted. As mentioned, we were both pretty buzzed from before, and after a few more wine glasses, my brain could not work as fast as usual. The man then walked further down the street and stood beside an ice cream bar. He was there for 15 minutes without buying anything nor leaving, just occasionally turning around to look at us. We were starting to struggle to keep an eye on him, because as I mentioned, he looked quite anonymous. Me, on the other hand, with my long, bright pink hair, made me only the more visible. Me and my friends started wondering if we should talk to someone, like the lady in the bar, but feared we would just sound paranoid and weird. As we could no longer see the man, we decided to pay and leave quickly before he returned. If he suddenly appeared, we would just call for the closest group of guys to help us. We began power walking down the street, looking behind us and everywhere in case he would appear. I suddenly felt much more sober due to the stress, and decided it would be more smart to take another street to the hotel instead of the lit-up and touristy one where we had seen him waiting. After all, he had clearly noticed we were scared, and by all logic, we would follow that street. So we quickly ran down that other street and a few blocks down back to the lit-up one. I stopped for a second to catch my breath and looked up the street with the ice cream bar, and he was indeed standing there in the middle of the street, looking up towards the wine bar we had just left, kind of walking around to look from other angles. I then knew we had not been paranoid at all, and he had been deliberately waiting for us. He had been so determined he had been waiting for more than 2 hours. Just this effort seemed too much for a random creep. My friend turned around too and saw him and freaked out. We started running down the street as close to the shops as possible, in front of people so it would block the sight of us if he turned around. It was about a 15-minute walk to our hotel, but we got there so much quicker, always turning around. It honestly felt like the scariest moment of my life. As we started running, I started thinking, but what if he's not alone? What if he had chosen us and had been messaging someone along with our location? Maybe he'd seen us days before going to the same bar and had worked out our schedules. And if so, how long had he been watching us? To say the least, I barely slept that night, and I felt so thankful that I had even noticed him lurking. Perhaps I'm overreacting, but my logic and all the weirdness around this makes me feel like we had just barely escaped something potentially horrifying. I'm a female. Back when I was 18, my mum had been doing work in the garden, so she was exhausted and went to bed early. It was winter, so it got dark early. I knew I would be the only one awake for the next few hours, until her partner got in from work at 4 a.m. I went about my usual nightly routine, rolled a joint and went out back to smoke it, as I did every night, and wasn't allowed to smoke in the house. The house had 2 floors, and my bedroom was on the top floor. After I had my smoke, I went back upstairs and continued watching whatever. About an hour later, I decided I would have one more joint, then head to bed. I finished rolling and got myself ready to head out into the cold. But just before I headed downstairs, something on my phone distracted me, and I sat back down on the bed, concentrating on that. When a minute or 2 passed, I heard a loud bang from downstairs. I thought to myself, it's just my mum's partner coming home. Then seconds later, I realized I didn't hear the front gate open, didn't hear the taxi pull up outside, and didn't hear the front door open. My cat is on the bed next to me, so it wasn't him, and my mum is asleep next door. So what could that bang be? I grabbed my taser and stuck it in my dressing gown pocket and go into my mum's room. Normally, she's such a light sleeper, but because she was exhausted from gardening, she slept through the noise. I wake her and tell her what I heard. She gets herself ready, grabs a metal pole, and we head downstairs. I insisted on going first because my mum is like 5'6" and 130 pounds, has MS, and is holding a flimsy metal pole. I figured my taser would be a little better should we encounter anyone. Looking around, everything seemed fine. However, the last room we checked is the bathroom, which is on the ground floor, to find that the window that sits just above the bath is wide open, and our 2 1-liter bottles of Tresemme shampoo and conditioner, which were on the windowsill, had been knocked to the bath. Of course, we're confused. How could this happen? It couldn't have been the wind. Now we're scared. It's 2:30 a.m. at this point, and my mum calls her partner to tell him someone has just tried to break through the window and to please come home. Oh, it's probably just a fox or something. Go to bed, you're being paranoid. That's his response. So we're like, well, you're no help. So they call the non-emergency police number to try and report it. 5 minutes later, 4 police cars and dogs all turn up. They look around, then come to the door and ask the obvious questions, after doing a walk around the house and area. They come back again and ask, do we usually keep our plastic garden chairs under the bathroom window? We do not. The police advise us that a dodgy gang have been going around the area trying doors and windows to breaking and steal whatever they can. They must have taken the garden chairs to stand on top of them to get in. The police also advised that a house a few streets over had just been broken into and everything was taken and the house destroyed on the inside. I don't think they were ever caught. The thing that freaks me out the most, had I not gotten distracted by my phone before going out to the back to smoke, I would have been outside sitting on the same chairs in the pitch dark where the intruders would have come around and seen me, and who'd have known what would have happened if that would have occurred. So to whoever was trying to break into my house, let's not meet. Let me start by setting the scene. On December 3rd, 2014, my birthday, I'm preparing to leave my office to begin my birthday celebrations when I get called into my boss's office. Chris, I'm sorry to tell you this, on this day especially, but business is bad and we're gonna have to let you go. I'm stunned. I leave the office making a vague remark that I'll collect my stuff in a few days. I jump on the subway to collect my girlfriend who worked at a human rights law firm. She finished her day and meets me, but inside the usual hugs and kisses, she keeps her distance. I know that when she does this, it's because she lost a case, so I make small talk as we hit the street. Stopping suddenly, she turns to me and explains, "Sorry, Chris, I can't do this anymore. It's not you, it's me." Before I get a chance to answer, she hails a cab and off she goes. Wow. Birthday. No job, no love of my life, all in the space of 2 hours. This situation needs alcohol, and badly. I reached the bar where I was meeting my friends for my birthday celebration. I got drunk very quickly. Copious amounts of red wine, chased with beer and shots. I argued with everyone, insulted a few, and was politely asked to leave by a steroid-infused doorman. I found myself in the middle of London at midnight, staggering home. By 2 a.m. I reached halfway to my house when my phone buzzed. A withheld number. In my self-pitied filled state, I thought it was my girlfriend. "Darling?" "I ain't your darling, you scumbag." I stood there, looking at my phone. "Who is this?" "You'll find out soon enough." I cursed and staggered another 90 minutes home. My legs had had enough. I hit the floor and almost crawled into bed and passed out. The next afternoon I woke up, remembered in fits and starts what had happened. I got really angry, then began the process of finding a new job and extracting my belongings from my old job and my ex-girlfriend. Then just before midnight my phone rings, another withheld number. Amanda?" "This isn't her, scumbag." "Who is this?" "You'll know soon enough." I work as a salesman in technology, raising money for startups, so I have a wide and deep network, but I'm also very private. I have a small family and few trusted friends. I rang around and asked if anyone was getting calls. No one. This was the start of a very exhausting 6 weeks. The calls would come in at night, sometimes early evening, sometimes early morning. I would answer the ones in the evening, as a lot of my contacts and clients used withheld numbers. The ones in the morning would just go to voicemail. At first it was the same few words, the word scumbag, a few cusses added for good measure, and the voice was male, but sometimes a female would be first and then it would be passed to the male. I recorded the voicemails and played them at the local police, but as there was no direct threat, or I could not identify the person, sadly, there was very little that they could do. Eventually things came to a head when I started getting emails. Watch out for LinkedIn contact info, folks, stating in graphic detail what they were going to do to me. This time the police could do a bit more about their tracing, but they couldn't find a location in the UK. The scum were using anonymous email tech. Finally one evening, in the middle of snow-filled January at about 8:34 in the evening, the phone rings, another withheld number, and I answer as I'm waiting for clients to confirm a new assignment. "Hello, scumbag. Did you get the emails?" "Yeah, I did." And I think you really should quit while you're ahead." I spoke very calmly. "Hey, scumbag, I ain't finished with you yet." I cut my stalker off and explained clearly. "Listen, my soon-to-be spending his short-assed life in an unbelievably incredible amount of pain. Let me tell you what's gonna happen now. Instead of you harassing me, I'm gonna hunt you, and then I'm gonna capture you and your girl, and then I'm gonna cook your girl as part of a special enchilada dish. Then we're going to eat her and wash her down with a nice Argentinian red. Then, my friend, I'm gonna make a dessert out of you. You see, my amateur stalker friend, I'm going to go full Hannibal Lecter on you. Now, the only way to stop these culinary adventures of mine is to stop your ramblings right now. So make a decision. There was a long silence, then a squeak. Sorry. And then the line cut. I haven't heard from my would-be stalker friend in a long time. Love to have you over for dinner. I'll even provide the wine. In any case, let's not meet. This happened to me a number of years back. I was home alone and my boyfriend had gone to work. He works the night shift and I usually work on weekends as I'm studying. I was just chilling, playing some games and talking to some friends while generally just enjoying my free time. My boyfriend can't message me from his job, so I'm just trying to make the most of my time before I go to bed. It must be around midnight at this point, and I look at my phone and decide, given the time, that I might as well call it a night. I start unplugging my consoles, which is a ritualistic thing for me to do, as I have this fear that they might catch fire in the night. So after unplugging everything and getting ready to hit the hay, I start putting on my nightie when I hear something in the distance. At this point, it's important to note that we live in a block of apartments, but this block of apartments is on the outskirts of town, and there's only one entrance with a whole lot of woods surrounding us. I was listening intently as we were on the ground floor of these apartments, and I looked out the window without turning the light on. There, from the underbrush, I could see a guy, followed by another guy and another. Within about 15 seconds, 6 men, all fairly tall and strong, dressed in black, most of them with masks of some sort covering their head. The traditional hat ski mask thing. I start to grow anxious. What were these guys doing? Surely there wasn't a who looks like a thief more contest going on in the middle of the night that I hadn't heard about. They start looking around the building, and seeing as I occupy one corner, or about a quarter of the downstairs space, after they go round a corner, I could no longer see them, but I pressed my ear up against the window as they were no longer in view to try and hear them. They weren't exactly being quiet. They were making plenty of noise and trying to fiddle with the front door of the building. Now at this point I'm starting to get nervous. Are they going to break into someone's flat? I really hope it isn't me. I listen, and that's when I hear an all too familiar click. However, the reason is because moments before, there was someone coming down the stairs. The person going down the stairs obviously ignored these would-be intruders, went right past them and carried on. There was no conversation, no noise that would indicate any altercation, and then the door didn't close for several seconds. Looking through my peephole now, I'm sure they weren't residents here. Not that I could recognize them with masks on. Why would they wait for someone to open the door, which they were fiddling with beforehand? However, I'm trying to not let it get to me and not assume the worst in people. When I look through the peephole, again, I see them looking around the 4 possible doors that they could try and tackle. It's either that or the flight of stairs. The entrance to my apartment in particular is just behind the stairs. I see them looking, individually looking at each door, trying to make a decision as to which one they're going to go for. And that's when 2 of them make little hand gestures and point to my door. It's important to note, the reason I can see this is because there's an automatic light sensor which triggers whenever someone comes in the proximity of the lobby. So, I could see them perfectly. they could not see me through the peephole. They start pointing to my door, and I feel my underwear fill with fear. I knew that they were going to target my home. At that moment, I really, truly wondered if police could get here in time. I felt so stupid. Why hadn't I called them before? I try as quickly as I can to walk towards the kitchen, where I grab the landline phone and start dialing 999. When the operator gets on the line, I tell her immediately what's going down, and that there are 6 strange men in my apartment complex eyeing up which house to rob, and they are just about to open and break down my door. She's being not very helpful, asking if I'd witnessed a crime being committed, because currently they hadn't done anything, and I told her that they clearly didn't live here and were trying to break into the apartment complex. At this point, she says that she's going to send someone out immediately, and after saying if I wanted to stay on the line or not, I tell her I'm going to leave the phone on the counter, but that I need to see what they're going to do, and that if I don't come back in 5 minutes, to tell them to hurry. And if she hears noises, well, that's self-explanatory. I go back to the peephole, and there they are. By this point, 4 of them are looking at one other door, and 2 of them are looking at the door next to mine. I really am starting to grow nervous, but hopeful that the police would be here in time to catch these goons. That's when all of them start merging and conglomerating towards my area. One of them gets a backpack out and starts getting this thing out of his bag. I'm not even sure what it was. It must have been a lockpick. He shoves it in my door and starts jiggling with the lock. I'm standing there in horror, but to my relief, I notice that the chain is over the door. I feel so grateful for my paranoia now, and I know that they're very unlikely to get in. That's when I hear it. They've managed to undo the first lock. I stand there and go over to the kitchen to whisper to the telephone operator what's going on. She says the police are nearly there. And before they can do the second click, do I hear police cars pull up in front of our house. The gig is up. They run to the front door as quickly as they can, and I try desperately not to touch my door, because that way I can prove to the police what they've done. The police are more focused on trying to catch the guys. 3 of them escape into the dark, but 3 of them are apprehended. They get taken into the police car, and then a police knocks on the door. I ask him if he wants to take pictures of what they've done already, and he says that they've already done that, and asks to be let in. I'd explained to him what I'd heard and what I saw, and he says thank you for calling and asks if anything else had happened to my memory. I tell him no. I was so afraid. I was so close to being robbed. I can't believe it. I never thought anything like this would happen to me. Moral of the story is, well, it's better to be safe than sorry. It's better to lock your doors and be paranoid than not. I have friends who live in somewhat safer areas who say they never lock their doors at night, and I don't think I'll ever understand that. The remaining 3 guys were eventually caught, as their 3 friends ratted them out. I don't know what happened to the case. I was never kept up with the case, but I hope that these guys were charged. In any case, let's not meet again.